Hello and welcome to the lightboard session. In this lesson, I'm going to talk about three types of clouds categorized by their service models. And these three types are the infrastructure as a service or IaaS, the platform as a service, which is PaaS, and the software as a service or also called as SaaS. To understand the difference between these three, I'm going to give you and talk about another example. Let's say there are three different types of entities who are looking for office space. There is one, the first entity is a very large organization with, let's say, 10,000 people that they want to accommodate. Now, as per the requirement, they're looking for an office space, and what they're looking for is just an empty shell, probably just an empty building, just the infrastructure, and then they take that infrastructure and then they would bring in their architects, their interior decorators, and they would design according to their needs, the workspaces, everything, right from the furniture to paint to interiors to desks to cubicle design of the cubicles, everything. They want to design everything. They want a complete control over everything. All they need is a bare shell. The second entity is a smaller organization with, let's say, 200 people, employees. And instead of building everything of their own, what they're looking for is to hire maybe like 2 floors in a technology park where they get not only infrastructure, but also the ready-made office with the carpets, the furniture, the desk, the cubicles, and that's what they're planning to hire. And that's what they're planning to rent, and they'll basically take the computers, just set it up. They would have all the rest of the infrastructure available, and then they'll just put the people and they start working, right? Off they go. And the third entity is, let's say, a freelancer and a smaller organization, a startup like me, who's looking for a place, but let's say I don't have a lot of budget. That's one. Second is I don't want to go and customize everything. I don't have neither the time nor the money to do that. So what I would want is a completely ready to just plug and play kind of an office space where I could hire probably a few desks, maybe a cabin, maybe a studio like this, a room like this, and then I would just go and take my laptop there, connect it to the internet, and I would expect everything to be in place, including the office, the common areas, the coffee machines, and everything else that I would need, including the internet and so on and so forth, right? Now, if you look at these three types of entities and their requirements, each of them have some specialized requirements, and based on that they would pick the option for the office space. And when we talk about these, it is exactly similar comparison that we can do here. Let's say when you talk about an infrastructure as a service, you get a lot of control. So what you basically go and ask for is, hey, I want the infrastructure pieces. I want to set up everything on my own. I want to have a complete control over the kind of infrastructure that I build, kind of servers that I set up, the sizes of the servers, the storage that I would require, the network configurations that I want to make. Everything I want to have a control over that. And that is an example of the infrastructure as a service. An example of an infrastructure as a service could be cloud services like, let's say, AWS, GCP, Microsoft Azure. A lot of Azure services fall under this category, even though there are certain services which fall under the second, which is PaaS. Now, with infrastructure as a service, what you can get from a service provider is the infrastructure components like compute, network, storage, databases, and then there are a bunch of other things that you can avail from them and then use them to set up everything on your own, manage it on your own, and then you basically sort of install your software, configure it, everything is done by you basically, right? But you get a lot of controls over there. Now, talking about platform as a service, in certain cases, You don't need to build the entire infrastructure on your own, but you would want to leverage a lot of components which are already there. Some of the examples of PaaS are some of the Microsoft Azure services, some of the AWS services like Elastic Beanstalk, for example, some, I will just say EB, Elastic Beanstalk of AWS. There is, if you're talking about container-based services and deployments, you have a platform called as OpenShift by Red Hat, which is also a platform as a service. I'll just talk about one of this, let's say OpenShift. Let's say you want to deploy your applications with containers. In order to do that, you not only need to know about Docker and should have a good working knowledge, operational knowledge about it, but also an orchestration engine which helps you to deploy your container workloads in a production-like environment. And that is where it comes to Kubernetes. So instead of learning about Docker and Kubernetes, where you should have a good operational knowledge of both of these in depth, because you would be running your infrastructure, let's say, in production. Instead of doing that, what you could do is say that, hey, I don't know about Docker or Kubernetes. Let's say if I'm a developer, I may not know about all of this at all. I may be running a startup. I may just have an idea, and I have written the code. Let's say I have written the code in Node.js and some JavaScript like React and so on. And I may have a database which is MySQL, and all I care about is running this application in a production-like environment, and all the infrastructure, the network, the compute, the storage, the databases, everything should be auto-provisioned by somebody else. But I want to run it on containers, basically. So in that case, instead of going for an infrastructure as a service, which would be setting up your infrastructure on cloud like AWS or GCP or Azure, then installing and configuring everything including Docker, Kubernetes. In certain cases, you can get a managed service as well, but that might fall under a PaaS again, right? And then on top of that, instead of figuring out how to deploy your application, you can just go to a platform like OpenShift, where you can just point your source code repository, and the OpenShift will automatically take your source, package it into a Docker image. So you go from your source to an image, and that image and then is taken and deployed at scale in using the container-based workloads, and it would also deploy the databases and everything else, connect them together, set up a load balancer on top of that, set up the networking configuration. So everything else is done in an automated way, and that is an example of platform as a service. The third, you don't have a lot of control over platform because the platform is given to you. It is automatically configured on its own. All you get is basically a deployed application. It scales on its own as well. You don't have a control over it, and you may not need it. So it depends on what you are really looking for. And a good example of the third category, a software as a service, is, you can come up with so many examples here. In fact, any application that you use today where you don't have to install the software on your desktop or your laptop typically falls under software as a service. That can also include, let's say, services like Gmail, services like Dropbox, where you can store your stuff on the cloud, services like Force.com. Force.com is actually PaaS for Salesforce, actually, but anything else that you use, consume daily. Let's say I'm using, even like things like Photoshop and Lightroom. I can actually transfer my photos on the cloud and work with it and edit it and so on the cloud maybe. So you can actually do that, or anything that you can do on the cloud using a browser instead of installing a software locally falls under the software as a service category, right? Now, this is the difference between the type of clouds that you consume based on what features that you need, how much control that you require, and how much capability that you have handling of this infrastructure. And based on that, you are going to pick the type of cloud for the purpose that you need and based on the audience that you are. And that is the difference between the three types of clouds based on their service models.